Welcome everybody to this webinar on social protection for recovery, which is a co-production between the World Employment Confederation and the International Labour Organization. My name is Tom Hadley. I'm an independent consultant. My background, though, is working for representative bodies in the UK, working with national government as well as international institutions. A lot of the work I did over the years was looking at the future of work, the future of jobs. We always talked about preempting disruption. I just didn't know there'd be this amount of disruption to be dealing with. So delighted that so many of you can join us for this really important topic. We've got some great speakers for you today. And as I mentioned, we're really keen to get your views. So use the Q&A box for questions, comments, sharing your own experiences as we go through. So that's the introduction. This is me here. So hi. Delighted so many of you can join us today. So let's go through the program. We have a play in 4 acts for you today. We're going to start by looking at some of the challenges, but also how we find solutions to those challenges. So that will be part number 1. The second part of today is looking at the social partners and how we can collectively come together to actually implement some of these solutions going forward. The third part is the Q&A session. So again, we're really keen to hear from you as we go through today. Use the Q&A box, and we've allocated a good 15 minutes to pick up on any of the questions. If we have time, if we're on schedule, we'll perhaps come to some of the questions early on, perhaps at the end of section 1, if we're running to schedule. And the final part is a bit of a wrap-up session, key messages going forward. So that's the agenda for today. Just a reminder on the next slide, in terms of what, the stakes, well, perhaps just in terms of the format, use the Q&A box. We've mentioned that a few times, but again, share examples amongst yourselves. If you want to share any links or any things, again, you can use the chat box for that. But for the questions specific to the speakers, do use the Q&A box as we go through. In terms of introduction from myself, I don't want to spend too long doing an introduction, but I thought a few things that did stand out for me, which is in the overview you were sent ahead of today's webinar, some of the stats. So in terms of my introduction, just to flag some of those statistics, so 2.7 billion workers across the world, representing about 80% of the global workforce, have been impacted in some form during the different lockdowns. That's just huge, isn't it? The other stat that jumps out is 400 million full-time jobs have been lost since the start of the pandemic. So the size of the challenge we face is great. I think one thing that we can say, though, is that the collective desire to find solutions to these challenges is equally huge. And that's one of the themes of today. How can we come together to help make a difference? One of the themes since the pandemic started has been cooperation, organizations coming together. And again, we're really keen to use today to accelerate that particular trend. And we see today not just as an end in itself, but it's a start of a conversation in terms of how we collectively come together to find solutions. So that's just a quick introduction from myself. If we move on now to the next slide, if we can. And this is the first part of today's session. So this is about identifying some of the particular challenges. What are some of the priorities and how do we collectively find solutions to us? And to introduce this first session, we're delighted to be joined by Christina Behrendt, who's the head of social policy at the ILO. So the format for today is relatively short presentations, about 10 minutes. But again, as we've said a few times, do put questions in the Q&A box and we'll come to them at different points if we can during the session. So Christina, over to you to kick us off.
Oh, sorry. No, now it's so my panel has disappeared because of the screen sharing. So this is I was struggling a bit. So thank you very much, Tom, and hello to everyone. It's really a pleasure to be with you today on this important panel. And indeed, as you said, I mean, the COVID-19 crisis has really disrupted labor markets, it has disrupted deployment, it has disrupted people's livelihoods. And at the same time, we see that social protection indeed has played a major role. And I'll just briefly take some minutes to take you through, well, it's really a very extremely brief summary of what has happened and some perspectives on that, and also to look what's necessary to move along. So let me just, sorry, I have problems. I think if you could move to the next slide from your side. I cannot manage to do that. It doesn't. So, oh, great. Thank you very much. So indeed, the pandemic has really exposed very serious gaps in social protection systems and has required urgent measures to close these gaps as a crisis response. But at the same time, we have also seen the absolute importance for countries to have very solid social protection systems in place. But unfortunately, this is not the case for many countries and for many populations. And just to give you a very quick highlight on the global situation, actually, globally, less than half of the global population has social protection coverage in some form or another. Obviously, the situation in Europe and Central Asia is much better than in other parts of the world. We have faced especially big challenges in Africa and Asia and the Pacific, where only a small minority of the population is covered. But even for Europe, we have seen quite huge challenges. And but the good news is that really in this crisis and in the country responses, almost all countries in the world have taken some measures related to social protection, really to address the crisis. And you see that on the map. This comes from the ILO COVID-19 Social Protection Monitor, and an update has just come out yesterday. So in total, we have recorded about 1,500 measures all around the world. And let me just go a bit in more depth into the question of the policy responses. And so if you could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So basically what we have seen, and I've already hinted at that, we have seen that the policy responses have come through two major channels. So on the one hand, we have the automatic responses to existing social protection systems. And these have been very, very important. But I mean, we haven't really been talking a lot about it. But I think it's important to highlight how much having a solid social protection system in place is really essential for countries to react to the crisis in a very immediate and automatic way in that sense. And social protection systems have played a major role in protecting people's health, protecting people's jobs and incomes. And we have seen how much this has really been important in strengthening people's resilience at the micro level, but also at the macro level for the entire economy, and also including for enterprises. So having this role as an automatic stabilizer for the economy is really essential. And countries have been adapting the way how they have been delivering social protection, for example, through the use of digital technology, physical distancing protocols, and other measures. So, but still, I think what became very clear also during the crisis is that the existing systems were not sufficient. Some of that has to do with the fact that it's simply a crisis of a scale that the social protection systems are not really made for. So this is really kind of a very strong crisis that affects everyone at the same time. So it's only natural that some additional measures had been taken. But at the same time, also the social protection systems really quickly realized that there were quite strong gaps in the previous in the existing coverage in terms of especially covering certain categories of workers, workers on temporary contracts, temporary agency workers that you have worked also a lot on and are working on, but also and very specifically self-employed workers and especially solo entrepreneurs. and where, I mean, some countries, they have had some kind of coverage in place, but this has been a challenge for many years. And in fact, some countries have put measures in place to immediately extend coverage to those types of workers, at least on a temporary basis. And these policy responses were strongly dependent on pre-existing structures, depending on what was there in the country, using both social insurance or tax finance benefits and measures, or a combination of both. And to a large extent also mobilizing additional resources, domestic certainly, and for some country also it was necessary to have some international support. So what we see now at this point, and if you could move to the next slide, please. Social protection systems are really at a crossroads. I think we have seen how important they are. We have seen what was possible in terms of improving them and strengthening them. And so that has really kind of given quite a lot of hope and push and momentum to move to universal social protection systems, including strengthening, reinvigorating, improving what is there, ensuring that they can provide universal coverage, that they can provide adequate and comprehensive protection, that they're sustainably and equitably financed and adapted to the world of work. But on the other hand, we see that some countries are already moving into some austerity and fiscal consolidation measures. So, and are already cutting back, which in many cases might be very premature. So, so there is a risk to, in a way, moving back to a context where there's limited coverage, where social protection systems are limited to quite minimal safety net benefits, that there might be a further erosion of labor and social protection with limited solidarity, risk sharing and redistribution, and fiscal consolidation, and definitely no decent work. So I would like to make 3 points in the time that I still have left. If you could move to the next one, please. So what would be needed? I think the first and foremost thing that we need is really consolidating and accelerating the extension of social protection who are not yet protected. Really transitioning from these short-term emergency measures to really making sure that the systems are being improved. And I think what we have there as kind of key principles, and these are the key principles which are embedded in international social security standards, is really making sure that there is universality of protection for everyone, including for workers in all types of employment, including those also in self-employment, the on-account workers, the temporary workers, which is really a central point. And we have already seen that there is already some policy commitment in that respect. For example, in the European Union social pillar, this is reflected. The G20 have come out on that. So I think there is a certain momentum that we can use. But ensuring that this kind of protection is adequate and can be easily transferred from one job to the next, that it's portable, that it can really support people's life and work transitions, that there's transparency, that the systems are really embedded in national law, that there's accountability as well, gender equality and good governance and trust. And not every type of social protection system really can comply with these principles. And I've just put, I don't want to go into that, but I've put some of the features that are rather encouraged or rather discouraged there from some work we have done, especially when it comes to extending social protection to those in the informal economy, because indeed extending social security to those in the informal economy is really one big feature that can really help workers to move from not being protected, from being in the informal economy, to transition to the formal economy and to be protected. You can move to the next slide, please. The second priority is on financing, really ensuring that there is sustainable and equitable financing for social protection systems. And we know in many countries there are really concerns about underinvestment in social protection systems. And so looking at that part is really essential. And in countries all over the world, I mean, I think there is certainly the challenges in Europe are different from the challenges in Africa. But I think there are challenges when it comes to really ensuring the sustainability and equity of social protection systems, and looking at ways how they can be financed in line with the principles that I've just lined out. And both social insurance plays a major role in that, but also tax finance benefits, be they universal or be they more the means tested type of social assistance to cover those who don't have any other form of protection. And finally, the last point, if we could move to the last slide. And this is to conclude. It's really, I think the key point and the key priority is really about strengthening the social protection systems with a bigger picture in mind. And I've listed there again these kind of five different attributes of really solid social protection systems, and that I've already mentioned before. And they actually come from a tripartite agreed framework that is reflected in international social security standards and which has been reaffirmed also in the ILO Centenary Declaration for the Future of Work just 1 year ago. And some key points that are important to look at in that respect is really making sure that these social protection systems are anchored in human rights and international social security standards, which have a number of important features that really help to support their stability and sustainability, and also making sure that these really work in a effective and equitable way. I think one other point that I would like to highlight is really making sure that national social protection policies and strategies are really being strengthened, are fit for purpose, including through social dialogue. And this one important part of this dialogue and of this work about thinking about improving social protection strategies and improving social protection systems is really the question of adapting them to the world of work. And I think we have many examples from countries in all parts of the world of how that can be done. And I think this is really an important dialogue that needs to be had, I think, in countries and in all parts of the world. And one lesson that we have learned from the COVID response is really that we need to have much stronger attention to short-term benefits that really can help people in their life and work transitions. So looking in particular at unemployment protection, also looking at short-time work schemes that have also played a very important role in actually preventing unemployment, not just supporting those who have become unemployed, but also sickness benefit, looking at maternity and paternity protection, parental benefits, health protection, the important linkages with child and long-term care. I think there is a lot that needs to be done in order to strengthen and to reinforce our social protection systems. And also being very aware that social protection systems don't operate in a vacuum. I think the coordination between employment and social protection policies for decent work is absolutely crucial. And not only employment and social protection policies, but we also need to look into the wider context, to look at macroeconomic policies, to look at tax policies, etc., trade policies. I think there's a whole range of policies that need to be also thought of and included in looking at that bigger picture in mind. And I think my time is up, so I would like to end here, but I'll just let you know that we have also I've put a number of resources in the last slide. So if you want to look at the presentation, then after the meeting, you're most welcome. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, Christine, and thanks a lot, and thanks for all these links. Again, any questions on what you just heard, use the Q&A box. I know there's a few questions coming in, which is great. Some of you also sharing information on the chat box, which is great to see. So Christina, thanks for that. And again, keep an eye on the questions. If there's things you can answer there and then, but we'll have time at different points to answer some of those questions. So great start to the day. Let's move on to one of the other big themes of the crisis, which has been around occupational safety and health, in particular about a safe return to the workplace. And delighted to be joined for this part of the session by Joaquim Pintado Nunes from the ILO to take us through this important topic. So over to you for this next section.
Thank you very much, Tom. I hope you can hear me. Yes. So this session will be on the interplay or intersect between safety and health at work and social protection. And of course, this is quite obvious as well. The more you prevent contagion in workplaces, of course, the lesser the burden for social protection systems will be. But also the more workers are protected and the more workers feel protected, the more you prevent the spread, because also, workers, will not have the need to go back to workplaces, namely because of, having, the conditions to stay at home when they're sick, or when they're tested positive, or to take care of their children, or to take care of sick relatives. So of course that, the intersect between safety and health and social protection is quite obvious. I'm going to try to control my slides here. Yeah, great. So this slide just expands a little bit more on this. Of course, that what we say is that when defining national policies for safe return to work, both the dimensions should be considered. So ensuring that workplaces are safe and without the risk of contagion through the measures that I'm going to mention in a while, but also that workers do have the conditions to stay at home when required. We also have to look not only into the direct risks related to the new coronavirus, but also all those that result indirectly from from the current situation. And I'm referring here, of course, to the mental health dimension of the crisis, namely because we know that stress and anxiety may very well also have long-term effects, namely for social protection systems. We also see that especially the unplanned absence of workers from workplaces may also lead to an increased workload for other workers, and increased workloads for other workers also have, of course, effects on their mental health, as the levels of stress and anxiety, or especially stress, will be higher. This can also have effects in terms of musculoskeletal diseases, and also we know from experience that the more you are stressed with time and what you have to do, the lower sometimes your perception of risk will be. And when your perception of risk is low, of course there is a risk, there's a potential for an increase in the number of accidents that are not related to COVID-19, but that still may lead you to very, very negative outcomes, including death. So we also see, of course, that there is a special need to prevent the contagion, to those who are the most vulnerable. And again, here, of course, we think of not only of the frontline workers, but also all those that operate in the informal economy, especially those that, sometimes it's even difficult to comply with confinement measures, or even with, basic safety and health measures, dealing with, hygiene, use of personal protective equipment, etc. So with this, I'd like to let you know, so what is the ILO's approach in terms of safety and health at work and the current pandemic? Of course, we have to look into the, all the phases or all the cycles of the pandemic. This because countries and regions, are facing the pandemic, at different stages. So of course, we need to look into all that is required to ensure a safe return to work and continuing working safely, but also, how safety and health can help us to recover from the crisis and also to be prepared for other crises in terms of, global health that, we may have in the near future. For this, we always use what we call, our preventative and integrated systems approach as expressed in two of the core standards on safety and health at work, which is convention number 155 and 187, which basically requires you to look into the interaction between all occupational hazards and not only those, in this case, directly related to contagion, by being exposed to the virus. And we also say, of course, that when defining national policy, but also very much when defining workplace policy and practice, you can never forget, the basics of safety and health at work. And never forgetting the basics means that, you always have to assess your risks, and you always have to manage, your risks following what we call the hierarchy of controls, where, of course, you have to try to eliminate the risk of being infected. And for this, for instance, you can have your workers, if possible, teleworking, so they will never be infected at the workplace level by the virus. You can try to implement different kinds of engineering controls by physically separating workers one from the other. Also try to implement, organizational measures. For instance, reorganizing working times so that you avoid a large concentration of workers, at the same time in the same workplace. And then finally, and again, I'll say this again, finally, the use of personal protective equipment, which is, always complements, the measures you find, above in the pyramid. We have also defined what we consider are, let's say, the main requirements, again, when developing policies for safe return to work, both at national and workplace level, which again would need to look into what we have in our international labor standards, namely, the defined system of, rights and responsibilities, where according to Convention 955, for example, it's the duty of the employers, as far as is reasonably practicable, to ensure that all workplaces are safe, and also the duty of workers to cooperate with their employers on the implementation of safety measures. Of course, the important role of social dialogue, both at national level, sectoral level, and workplace level, namely the importance of workers' representatives to work with employers on, risk assessment and implementation of preventive and control measures. Of course, the fact that you cannot address, not only at workplace level, but even at national level, you cannot address COVID-19 without looking into your national safety and health systems. You cannot address COVID-19 without reinforcing your infrastructures in terms of, regulatory frameworks, in terms of, the capacities of occupational health services, in terms of the capacities of social partners, etc., etc. You always, require, and we see this from practice, that, the more, government agencies coordinate their efforts, namely labor and health, the better the results you will have. And again, that there is an acute need of providing not only accessible, but also reliable information to the population. And here again, very much to the most vulnerable groups of workers, which sometimes, are more difficult to reach in terms of providing this kind of information. At workplace level, again, it's the fact that each workplace, it's different from the other. So you always need to assess the specific risks of contagion you have in your workplace. You need to look into, the premises. You need to look into the different operations. You need to look into the features of your workforce. You cannot copy what is done in one workplace to another one, because that does not work. You need to look, for instance, into the fact of having in place, the critical staff or services, namely the people, who knows how to deal with, the risk of contagion, by having the required expertise. We also see that, again, and I already mentioned this, it's not only the risk of contagion, it's also, all the other risks that may be related to this crisis. Again, when it comes to mental health, but very much also, the effects of having many workplaces, shutting down operations or suspending operations, because this can also have, consequences in terms of, for instance, maintenance systems. And we have seen in a couple of countries that after a lockdown period, we had some industrial accidents that injured or even killed workers, because again, this was an indirect effect of the pandemic, and the appropriate safety measures were not implemented at workplace level. This slide just highlights the main ILO standards on safety and health at work that are applicable to this situation as any other. So again, Convention number 155, which defines, rights and duties of employers and workers. Convention number 187 on, promoting a preventative culture at national and workplace level. Of course, the Employment Injury Benefits Convention, the Labor Inspection Conventions, etc., etc. All of this is available, and it's just a reference on, the main standards applicable to this current pandemic. This is what the ILO is doing in terms of COVID-19. So we are very much providing direct assistance to countries, either through policy guidance, technical guidance. We are developing global tools on risk management. We are adapting these tools to the national context. The direct assistance to countries also looks into working with national legal frameworks, providing assistance in 3 areas that, I'll just refer, on the next slide, and also very much working on communication and awareness raising. This is well, we have here some examples of recent ILO tools on COVID-19. By clicking on the link, if we'll have this slide later on, will lead you directly to the web page where you can find the tool. As you may see, it's very much on the risk of contagion, mental health, and other associated risks with the pandemic. This is also a reference to, well, the ILO portal on COVID-19, but also the website on safety and health at work, where you will find all this information. And this is all I had to say, and thank you very much. And I'll be available for questions, of course. Thank you.
Great, fantastic. And do continue using the Q&A box. We've had some really good questions come in already. So any questions, comments on what you just said, do use the Q&A box for that. So one of the big priorities for the private sector employment services sector during the crisis has been helping that safe return to work process. So we're delighted to be joined for our next slot by Sébastien Delfosse, who's a board member of the World Employment Confederation, as well as being chair of the EU Sectoral Social Dialogue Committee. So Sébastien, over to you to provide your perspective on occupational health and safety and that return to the workplace. So Sébastien, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Tom. And today I will limit my introduction due to the lack of time, because we could say so many things about this topic on 3 main aspects. The first one is really what we did for the security and the safety back to work as an industry. Second point is how do we as private employment services industry can support social security, employability and income, so more the social protection aspects. And the last point is the opportunity that we see as an industry for social innovation. So starting maybe with the safely back to work. And And I will not explain, everybody knows the situation and the impact of the COVID-19 on the employment. It was showed by Christina at the beginning and by Tom with some statistics. But our industry of the staffing and temporary agency work industry was heavily impacted by the crisis. So we had a lot of temporary agency workers that were really stopped in their activities from one day to another one. As from May, June, we were, as companies, really asked by many clients and global clients about what support we could do also to the return to work and I would say the end of the lockdown and how we could get again people at work. And that's why we as an industry really worked on many protocols, and maybe we can already move to the next slide. Really working as cross countries, across the world with all our members, trying to identify which are the measures, the protocols, the communication that we could put in place together with our clients, but also with experts and with authorities, really to sustain and to support a safely back to work. So as a World Employment Confederation, we really put a big action plan with a lot of coordination with the members, with the countries, to have a real approach on this. So on the next slides, you can really see what we did, for example, regarding how to arrange the workplace to ensure security, again, with a lot of inspiration by the authorities in the countries. And maybe also in our communication, you can see on the next slide that each federation member of the World Employment Confederation was also adjusting those plans to the countries and also providing a lot of communication and tools for the clients, for the temporary agency workers, really to support them in the back to work. So we really are focused on the safety protocols that we could put in place together with clients and employees. Of course, the question is, what are the next steps? Because we moved from a lockdown situation to, I would say, partially back to work. We don't want to stop our work here. We believe that as a private employment services industry, we can also go a step further, really, in supporting the safely back to work. And so again, we are continuing our work with members, with stakeholders as the ILO, for example, the European Commission, a lot of experts, really to bring our contribution and what we can do to really support this safely back to work. Another big important aspect is of course social protection during the pandemic and the lockdowns and as today. And on that part, you can see on these slides the fact that agency workers are quite good coverage by social security in many countries across the world. Of course, with difference from country to country, but the main difference you can see is that with other forms of work, as I would say the traditional fixed term contract or self-employment, there we see big difference. So in many cases, we see that in countries, there is a focus on temporary agency work and their situation. But when you compare the situation and the protection of agency workers with open-ended contracts, you can not see big difference. You can well see a very big discrepancy with self-employment. So this is really showing that as employers of agency workers, we also are able to provide the access of social security for the agency workers. Of course, it is not perfect. We have still improvements needed on the portability of the benefits when people change from employer, of change from kind of contracts. We also saw that, and we see that in some cases there are some, I would say, stricter conditions for agency workers to get the benefits of social security, and that's really something that we want to improve to the future. So on the next slide, you see also example that if social security is the baseline, and we see also difference in the baseline for country, not specifically for agency workers, but from employees in different countries, depending of, I would say, the social protection that is given to employees. Our industry also decided to offer complementary benefits to the statutory systems. So you can see, for example, what some countries are doing regarding pension, health insurance, access to credit or accommodation. And this is something that is really put as an industry. And I would add that on top of this, there are also some, I would say, individual initiative of companies that can be in addition of this. Also some examples in the coming slides about what some countries really put it in place on top of the social security and really before the pandemic and the COVID-19 situation regarding giving more protection to agency workers. For example, France, but other countries did it as well. France really invested and developed a strong system, a scheme of health insurance, not only for the workers, but also for their family. And this is really also supported and based on social dialogue. In Italy, there we have strong initiative and best practices regarding the training, also for employers, but also other benefits that are really given to agency workers, for example, in case of pregnancy. And on the next slides, more focus really on what is done and really important in the transition to the new normal is really to work on the skills of the agency workers. And again, we have strong experience with Japan and Switzerland. I have 3 minutes left, so I will a little bit speed up. And again, what we are really also doing is really advocating that temporary agency workers, as other employees, need really to be more protected in the pandemic, and that the baseline, and I would say the scheme that are existing, needs to be improved. The key success factors of this is really recognizing our employment agency as employer, and we already mentioned the importance of social dialogue. Last but not least, I will speak about what's the opportunity for social innovation, because we see the world of work is changing. We have different form of work today. It was also highlighted by Christina in her presentation. And our opportunity is really, we want to improve access to effective transition on the labor market, especially from sectors who are knowing a big decrease of activity, airlines industry, for example, hospitality, to sectors that are in demand. Maybe move to the next slide. Also really important is that the protection needs to be available irrespective of how people engage to work. As Christina also said, social protection needs to be adapted to the world of work, the new world of work. Skilling, reskilling, upskilling is really important today, because we see an acceleration of a trend that was already existing, but COVID-19 will really speed the need of transformation. and really are called to recognize and really cover all the forms of work in these aspects, and our industry can really provide expertise to support governments, authorities, and social partners on this. Thank you. We cannot hear you, Tom.
Classic mistake. I shouldn't be doing that. Fantastic presentation and some really good examples about how the sector is helping. And the feedback, certainly, that I've had speaking to employers around the world is people need help. People need help, especially, you know, you've got smaller businesses out there who definitely need extra support in negotiating that safe return to work. So thank you for those first 3 presentations. There's been some really good questions coming in. Do continue to use the Q&A box from the last 2 presentations as well, and we'll reflect on those presentations after the next section, but do keep putting those questions in as we speak. So let's move on to the second part of today's session, which is kind of looking ahead, and in particular looking at the role of social partners, and to lead us into this. It's great. We've got Evelyn Astor here with us from the ITUC. So Evelyn, do you want to kick off with this? And again, as you're listening to Evelyn's presentation, any comments, questions, do put them in the box. So Evelyn, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tom. I'll start by remarking how the COVID crisis has really exposed the gaps between those workers who have access to social protection and those who don't, like sickness benefits, unemployment support, and healthcare. But I think Christina really highlighted this in her presentation, that even before the crisis, less than half of the world's population actually had access to any form of social protection. And only 1/3 of the world's population had access to comprehensive schemes in line with ILO standards. And this has sort of been alluded to in the previous presentations, that coverage gaps are especially acute in cases of precarious work. It's also especially a challenge for informal workers, especially because many of them are not able to access contributory social security schemes. And what hasn't been mentioned so far, but is also important, is that women are disproportionately undercovered in social protection. And when they are covered, they have lower benefits because of the penalization of unpaid care work into their social security contributions. Now, these coverage gaps and the trend of precarious workers being especially undercovered is especially problematic in this crisis, because we know that those workers who are on low paid and precarious contracts have been those that have been most exposed to job loss. So they actually need social protection the most, but they haven't been able to access it in many cases. And this really reinforces unions' longstanding position that governments must build up and extend social protection to all workers, irrespective of contract type, employment type. And we also need to reinforce efforts to support decent work and formalize the informal economy. Now, Christina has highlighted that many governments took emergency social protection measures to provide additional protections to workers affected by this crisis. And this is positive. We should encourage this. But we also know that the automatic responses through existing social protection programs were able to respond faster and more effectively, as she also rightly highlighted. So going forward, we need to avoid emergency patchwork solutions. We need statutory, rights-based social protection schemes that are grounded in law. We feel that this will allow for a just recovery, and this will help to build resilience going forward, because we'll be better prepared in the face of future crises, whether it be another pandemic or another trigger for an economic crisis, irrespective of a health crisis. I would like to make a remark specifically to the point made by the previous speaker, Sebastian Delfosse, on the role of employers, because he mentioned how some private employment services are providing supplementary support to Social Security. And this is all well and good. It's great that they're providing additional protections to workers, but I think it's important to reiterate that discretionary measures for employers are never going to be enough to resolve the coverage gap issues. So, I mean, social protection is a recognized human right. It's enshrined in numerous international instruments, in ILO standards, and the state has the overall and primary responsibility for delivering on the right to social protection. I'd like to make a remark about financing as well, because it's very difficult to have conversations around extending social protection without addressing how to pay for these extensions. And, you know, we can't afford it is a pretty regular response from many governments when unions are demanding for extensions to social protection. And to that, I would like to say that the truth is often a bit more nuanced than that. I think we need to acknowledge that poverty and inequality also have widespread economic and social costs, and that social protection has been shown to have a number of economic benefits. It has a role in stabilizing the economy, stimulating aggregate demand, and it can help prevent crises from getting worse and can help promote a swifter recovery. And while creating fiscal space, mobilizing domestic resources is not necessarily easy, there are a number of options at government's disposal. And examples include reprioritizing and reallocating public spending, making social spending more of a priority within state budgets, leveraging social security contributions in a fair way between employers and workers. And on this, I would like to remark that many governments over the last years, especially in the response to the previous crisis, had actually cut back on employers' social security contributions, which further undermined financing base for social protection schemes. I give the example of Romania, who recently cut social security contributions. Progressive tax revenue, I think, is important to consider as well. In particular, corporate taxes, wealth taxes, inheritance taxes, financial transaction taxes. Oxfam did a really good report last year that showed that only 4 cents in every dollar of tax revenue collected globally came from taxes on wealth. And these types of taxes have actually been reduced or eliminated in many countries over the recent years, further undermining the potential resource base for social protection. And financial transparency, tackling tax evasion, addressing illicit financial flows. This is also a serious problem in some countries, and addressing that could actually have the potential to bring significant revenues to some states. In Africa, UNCTAD had estimated that around 89 billion is lost every year. That's about 3.7% of the continent's GDP to illicit capital flights. And that's more than double the amount of development assistance that's injected annually into the continent. So I think this is important to keep in mind as context. Now, I'd like to say something about the international community and what role it has to play, especially as this meeting is being organized in part with the ILO. And I would like to make the case that strengthened international solidarity is important now, more important now than ever. Because even with all the possible measures to expand fiscal space for social protection at domestic level in the different ways that I mentioned, there are some countries, especially those least developed countries, those that are experiencing major financial shocks as well, who might find it challenging to raise enough government revenue on their own in the short term to finance social protection extensions. And I think this is where the support of the international community is especially crucial. The ILO had done some costing estimates of what would be needed to extend universal social protection floors to the lowest income countries. The figure is $78 billion for 2020. And while this figure might not sound like a lot, it's less than many governments' own stimulus plans. This figure actually represents around 15% of the collective GDP of these countries. And this is why the ITUC, together with a number of civil society organizations and some governments, including the government of France, we have been making the call for a global fund for social protection. And the idea of this fund would be to help catalyze social protection financing for those countries who have funding gaps that are too acute for them to be able to cover them in the short term. So in other words, low-income countries, those experiencing shocks. And the aim would be to help them build up adequate and sustainable systems over the long run. I know we're short on time, so I will stop here and happy to answer any questions in the box.
Great, fantastic, Evelyn, and that was very thought-provoking. And again, any questions or comments to Evelyn, please do send them over. So before I introduce our final slot for this section, again, don't forget to send any questions or comments in. We'll be reflecting on those afterwards. So Michael and Joachim, after this one, perhaps just reflect on the themes that are coming out of the questions. If any of our speakers want to come in and specifically mention anything on the back of the questions that you've already been answering, we'll have about 10 minutes to do so. But before we get to that, let's introduce our next speaker, Luis Rodrigo Morelos from the IOE. So now providing an employer perspective. So delighted that you can join us. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure for us to join this panel. I could not stress more how important is for employers social protection for recovery, not only because of its financial component or because businesses are one of the main funders of social protection schemes, but this is part of our social commitment, and this is why we have been pushing so strong on the agenda of social protection. And we have been supportive always of the recommendation of the ILO recommendation on social protection floors, which has a real added value to these efforts for its focus and because of its greater flexibility. So to be realistic and efficient. And this is why we are also highly committed in supporting SDGs. In particular, our target 1.3. As you've listened from my previous colleagues, this topic is not new, but the challenges around it have been further exposed with the pandemic, and the urgency is much more evident, as just Evelyn mentioned. Some of the challenges have been addressed by Christina, by the ILO, also by Evelyn. But let me draw your attention to at least five of them that we consider very important from an employer perspective. First, we have the aspect of sustainability, which is a challenge that we often forget. The strong pressure on the financial sustainability of social protection systems in many countries demands urgent reforms that respond to the specific needs and demands to be coherent with our socioeconomic traditions. Sometimes we lack openness or flexibility to explore different funding options. So we have to do this without any prejudices. We have to look out even into private schemes if needed. Second, we have the aspect of informality. This is one of the major challenges that still needs to be tackled. There is a need to look further at the root causes and elaborate on innovative ways to bring informality to the conversation on social protection for recovery. The development of national social protection systems needs to go hand in hand with policies to address the plight of a significant number of workers in the informal sector who are not covered and nor contributing to the system. And it is also key to improve the framework conditions for companies to ensure that economic growth and employment are created in the informal sector. Third, it's occupational safety and health, which was dealt in detail by the ILO. So I won't elaborate much in it, but we are of the idea that there will be no quick recovery if we do not do the right things in terms of OSH. So beyond the specific measures taken in response to the pandemic, OSH is and will be at the core of the future of work. COVID-19 is with no doubt speeding up change at the workplace. Working time, workplaces are really transforming. For instance, digital workplace realities are becoming more and more the rule. And the culture of prevention is to be mainstreamed. There, we have the challenge of not falling into over-regulation or non-realistic policies or measures, turning this inefficient. But instead, we have to look into smart, clear, and adaptable regulation to the circumstances. Social dialogue will certainly play a key role in these efforts. Good governance will also be part of the solution. We refer to the SMEs and workers in more vulnerable sectors, because there is a stronger need to assist business and their workers, regardless of the contractual situation, including the self-employed and non-permanent or casual and the informal workers, of course. Because social protection schemes have also to do with individuals struggling to keep their business alive, with SMEs that have strong difficulties to create well and decent jobs, for example. And fifth, we refer to efficient transitions. Social protection is also about safety nets, about social stability, but it is also about promoting efficient transitions. It is about competitive economies. It is about proper business environment, successful business stories. And for this, we may need to focus not only in reducing inequalities and fostering social cohesion, but also in the promotion of skills, development, enabling sustainable enterprises, fostering productivity and employment as key aspects for transitions and avoiding, of course, poverty traps. If we move to the next slide, the COVID-19 pandemic is not only a health, but also an employment and social crisis where risks and uncertainty remain high. The situation is changing every day, and we have not an idea on when it is going to come to an end. But we can already draw on some lessons, what we are looking at. And first, let me refer to the aspect of business continuity. We have all witnessed the huge impact on business continuity, leading to a serious disruption on employment. And we have evidence how social protection is critical to navigate the crisis. The impact on countries has been higher where there are weak social protection schemes and where there are no policies for business resilience. Without business continuity, there will be no enterprises, and without enterprises, there will be no decent work. Both support for business continuity as well as providing income support for workers is really crucial. Then we have to look at the importance of well-designed and sustainable social protection systems. Is second to none to foster a robust and inclusive recovery. An effective and comprehensive design of the systems is required, and not a circumstantial one. We have to look also to fiscal space. We have to be mindful of the lack of domestic resources at the national level. There are existing options, as was mentioned before, to increase fiscal space, but enabling them will be easier through transitions of the informal sector to the formal sector. We have to be nonetheless cautious on the use of subsidies, while increasing aid and transfers has proven effective for some countries. We cannot neglect that. And overall, for vulnerable sectors, it is often not fiscally sustainable in the long term. So to increase effectiveness, efficiency, and sustainability of policies is, in our view, of paramount importance. Then we have social protection floors financing. There's a financing gap that continues to be an issue, and there's currently a competition for funds with no doubt on various aspects of the COVID-19 recovery. So this on top of a kind of donor fatigue as well. So again, in this area, maximizing domestic fiscal space and fostering transitions from the informal to the formal economy are critical for the extension of contributory coverage. Greater international solidarity was also mentioned as a key aspect, but it needs to go along with the technical assistance to overcome implementation gaps and to avoid an increase in the poverty and inequality. For this global coordination, more proactive policies for an employment-centered response are urgently needed in the coming months for an inclusive recovery. And here, the ILO should be in a leading role. It has the expertise, the tripartite convening power, and direct access to deliver technical cooperation in countries, and a broad range of instruments that were already listed in addition to recommendation 202. And the IOE, of course, is more than willing to contribute to this effort. Having said that, on our next slide, we highlight 5 key underlying principles to take into account in the building of future-proof social security systems. As I mentioned, sustainability. Social protection schemes will need to be much more sustainable and will need to be built on the basis of lessons learned from countries that have already made a successful journey in developing social security systems. Then inclusiveness. We need to provide individuals with a greater sense of security and foster their employability to support effective transitions from one job to another, and securing access to basic social safety nets for all. Third, policy coherence. Rather than a combination of subsidies, an efficient approach is needed, and the design and implementation of social protection schemes should be aligned with employment policies. They should serve to stimulate active job search and to boost labor markets. Then we have to acknowledge that there's no one size fits all. Each country will develop its own model of social protection, and emerging and developing countries will not inevitably move towards the current model based on open-ended full-time employment. The evolution of social protection schemes in these countries will likely occur under different circumstances. So we have to be mindful of that. Then collective action and solid institutions. We need to strengthen national laws and therefore reinforce capacity building at national level. In more fragile countries, political will and funding is not enough to put social protection structures in place. We also need to address the know-how, the technical aspects, and here the stakeholders are the best place to assess the situation and to bring solutions reflecting their needs. So these are the key aspects that we think we have to bring to the discussion, and we are more than willing to engage into a constructive debate towards social protection for reconstruction. Thank you very much.
Right. Fantastic, Luis Rodrigo, and thank you for providing that employer perspective. Before we move to the wrap up, we've got about 5 minutes just to reflect on some of the questions. So thanks for those who've sent questions in. I know a lot of those have been answered already. Perhaps Michael and Joachim, if you want to reflect on any themes that are coming out of the questions that people are raising, be interested to get a flavor for that before we start moving on to the wrap up. And equally, any speakers just wanted to reflect on anything that's come your way in terms of the questions, if you wanted to jump in with any sort of very quick remarks on that one. So Michael or Joachim, do you want to come in with a bit of a flavor of the questions being asked?
Yeah, thank you, Tom, and hi to all. Thank you very much to all the speakers. And thank you very much for all the questions being put forward in the Q&A box. I think a lot of questions were about the coverage of social protection and the comprehensiveness on it, and also very much the role of social dialogue in social protection systems. So I think overall the themes: how's the coverage, how does social dialogue play a part, and of course how do we make sure that it's comprehensive and covers all to a measure that they needed. And then we had some side tracks, which was very much focused on direct support to countries to support the implementation of occupational health and safety measures, and also a question on how remote working impacts the ability to train, reskill, upskill, etc.
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary. So if any of the speakers wanted to come back with any thoughts on what you heard or what people have asked, that last point that you made, I think is a really interesting one. Some of the feedback so far has been about, okay, what the practicalities. So if we're talking about upskilling, reskilling, how do we do this in the virtual world? I think the other theme that comes out of that is the important role of representative organizations. And I think the crisis has been a reminder of that, whether it's worker representative bodies, but also business representative bodies. People are looking for help and solutions, especially with there's so much information out there. People need organizations, employers need organizations they go to help them make sense of all that information. What do I really need to do? How can I do this with all the disruptions that's happening? So again, some really good messages come there. So before we move on to the wrap up, any final comments, questions, or comments or feedback from the different speakers on the questions that you've been asked before we move on?
Tom, there is a question in the Q&A that has not been answered.
Yeah.
The question from Faustina van Appelen. She asks if social protection is mostly a financial challenge. Isn't it also a question of organizing a social relation between individuals, between organizations, between groups, or even having organized social and economic nation in which newborns and children are counted and are protected by their family, their communities, or their governments? So basically, she's asking whether it's just about financial capabilities, or it's more of how the economy is organized, how countries are organized among people in order to build trust and generate the resources for social protection. I guess the question is more addressed to everyone, but mainly I would first give it to Evelyn there, because she talked about the affordability of social protections.
Yeah, thanks for flagging that, Michael. Evelyn, did you want to come back on that?
Sure. I mean, I think it's a question that raises a lot of different issues, so I'll have to see if I can answer it all. I don't think I can, but I think on the question of the financial challenge, no, it's not just a question of finances, but you need finances in order to build and pay for its delivery. So, but of course, when it comes to formulating social protection policies, this indeed requires a broad dialogue between governments, workers, and employers' organizations, as well as representative groups of people who are affected, for example, people with disability, people in the informal economy, to ensure actually that social protection can meaningfully respond to the demands that citizens have and their needs. So I absolutely agree, and the support of the family, community-based measures are of course important as well, and are an important complement. But when directing my intervention on social protection, I was focused primarily on statutory systems organized by the government and paid for through public finances, and the contributions of workers and employers, if that can provide a little bit of clarification in the focus of my intervention.
Thanks for that. And a bit like a quiz show, if anybody would like to come in on that question, fingers on the buzzer. There will be a prize for the winner. If anybody else like to come in on that one.
Luis Rodriguez would like to respond.
Oh, Luis.
Thank you, Tom. Yes, this is indeed a very interesting question. Indeed, the financial aspect, no doubt, is very, very important. But I would say that it is, when we talk about social protection, it's also about enabling people. And it's enabling people and creating also employability creating, for example, developing skills or supporting entrepreneurship and transitions that facilitate transitions. We have to create enabling environments so to tackle informality and to face all the challenges and all the gaps in protection. So indeed, there's a wide range of measures that we can think of, a wide range of policies, and some of them might have a very important financial component. Some others would rely much more on a smart and innovative ways of finding solutions. And there, I think that it is very important that that we put social dialogue at the forefront as a key tool to find solutions. Standards are there, but would not represent the response to everything, and social dialogue will likely find solutions that are adaptable and fit for every situation.
Great, thank you for that. And again, as we move towards the wrap-up session, do continue using the Q&A box. Any other questions? So even if we can't come back to you in the time of the webinar, we will come back to you potentially afterwards. So do keep sending comments and questions. Again, as we do the wrap-up, it'd be interesting for people to post comments. The one thing that you're perhaps going to take away from today, anything that's changed your mind, challenged you, so any sort of new things that you're going to do on the back of today. So it'd be good to capture some feedback from you guys on that as we go towards the wrap-up session. So let's do that wrap-up now, and we've got three great speakers just to reflect on what you've heard and perhaps some of the takeaways. And let's start with Sang-Hwan Lee, who's the Director of Employment Policy within the ILO. So Sang-Hwan Lee, over to you for your reflections on today.
Thank you so much, Tom. Actually, on behalf of the ILO Director General, Guy Ryder, I really want to thank everybody who has been preparing for this webinar, or also the excellent contribution we have listened today. I also want to take this opportunity to congratulate Bettina. I'm sure she's here on the election as the president of the World Employment Confederation, because I have known her for quite a while. So it's great news for the ILO and also for the World Employment Confederation. So congratulations, Bettina. I think one of the key takeaway message, actually, as far as I'm concerned, is that this is a really solemn reminder about this crisis, because this crisis, as we discussed before in the previous webinars, this crisis really laid bare some of the weakest link of our current economic and social system. I'm now talking about social protection, the occupational safety and health. We keep talking about this, and we keep talking about how important they are, but probably we haven't done sufficiently. It's very clear actually during the crisis. And so the presentation from Christina and Joachim actually highlight this point, and then clearly indicating what we need to do. And also it's the concern and some of the approaches were very much well echoed and even elaborated by Berlin and Luis. I mean, it's really great to hear their perspective actually from workers' side employers, but I see lots of the common ground, and I see this of a strong consensus on what to do. I think there is also a very strong agreement because of this, and we shouldn't really waste this opportunity to strengthen social protection system, to make our economy and labor markets more resilient. I very much like the Sebastian's presentation. I mean, he actually gave us some idea about how we can somehow utilize or mobilize our social employment service systems to actually support the actual strengthening of the social protection in the coming years. I think I strongly believe there are important role to be played by actually the employment services. And occupational safety health, I mean, it's now everybody can agree very easily. Also, it's the precondition for inclusive and the job-rich recovery. There's no doubt about this. Unless you have a good actually OSHA system in place, you give some the assurance to workers about the safety and health at work, then it's very difficult to bring workers back to their workplace. And at the same time, I just want to highlight one point, adding to the Joachim's excellent presentation. In our view, is also OSHA is the source of very important source of the job creation as well. I recently read the McKinsey's survey with this, the leading CEOs. They were indicating the most recruitment in their last 5 or 6 months is mainly about the OSHA related issues. And they are very much interested in actually the reinforcing this recruitment effort in the coming months. So I mean, this is something actually can be considered from the employment service perspective. I just use a couple of minutes actually because for more general observation, because this is the last of this current actually the webinar series. So I think I very much hope to discuss further with the WEC about what will be our next step. But I think there are some broader key take-home message, which actually come out very clearly from this webinar as well. First, I think the employment services, private and public, they're all important in saving or protecting jobs and enterprises, of course, and reallocating the labor and workers, and also facilitating the recruitment during very difficult time like the COVID-19 crisis we have seen. And also the employment service is crucial in the keeping workers to attach to the labor market. I mean, there is a very strong agreement on that. Another very strong consensus I have seen is that on the importance of the partnership and collaboration between private and public employment service. All the webinar I attended, this message came out very, very strongly. So we have to discuss further how we can actually to make it happen, how we can actually collaborate in a much more effective way. Probably one good news is that we have tools and good policy framework, which has been tried and tested, like the International Standard Convention 181 on the private employment agencies. It actually came out in all the discussions and also accompanying the recommendation. I think this will provide a good basis for actually the strengthening our work in that respect. But that's not enough, because we hear a lot about this innovation, and we need to be more smart and creative. I think our labor market institution to be more innovative, especially in designing services and the programs. That's what actually is expected. That's something we really need in actually coping with this crisis, and also making the recovery is more resilient and job rich, and then also the inclusive, and with much stronger social protection system, and also a much better system of the occupational safety and health. With that, thank you so much.
Right, that was a fantastic wrap up and some really good, strong messages there which we'll take forward. So Bettina, over to you, the new president.
Thank you so much, Tom, and thank you so much, Sanjon, for your incredibly kind words. Absolutely delighted from my side, and definitely looking back at the wonderful cooperation we've had so far. I am absolutely thrilled at what lies ahead. And actually, Sanjon, this is my first official mission since I was elected 2 weeks ago. A mission, I'm afraid, that I'm doing virtually here from a little boxed office in Zurich, but still here we are. I'd like to, on behalf of World Employment Confederation, express a huge thank you. First of all, to all of you for joining here, all the experts for sharing their insights, Christina, Joachim, Sebastian, Evelyn, Luis Rodrigo, all incredibly thought-provoking and actually informative perspectives, which is what we need at this stage, of course. Sanjon, you mentioned it. This was the third of this series of webinars that we've hosted over the past 5 to 6 weeks, and I can assure you that World Employment Confederation already looks forward to many more, hopefully at some stage, not in this context anymore, but in a future context, which is more linked to what we call the road to recovery. So count on us, count on the private employment services and the contribution that we are making. You said it yourself, partnerships are key. We are absolutely aligned on this, and you can count on us going forward for sure. Our focus has been clear this past weeks and months. All my colleagues, all the World Employment Confederation, companies, partners, associates, their minds and hearts around the world are set on keeping and getting people back to work and the workplace safely. So today we gave ourselves in those 90 minutes time to deep dive on social protections, which is obviously, in our view, one of the key challenges for labor markets across the world. Among the many things the crisis has accelerated, it is the strong support for the reform of social protection systems and the recognition that no one should be left behind or outside the protection schemes. Automatic or emergency measures are one thing, but today we also looked at the urgency and opportunity for social innovation in social protection schemes. So far, we know it, the social protection systems were built for those who, in a way, were already protected or are already protected. It's almost a winner-takes-it-all scenario, benefiting all who already have the best access to income protection and training opportunities. We heard it. The downside are that more than half of the world's population is left outside, those who are not in formal employment contracts. There's the millions in informality, but in recent years, there's also the growing cohorts of people working in new ways. Before the crisis hit, we saw the signs already, and we diagnosed the stress this put on labor markets. COVID-19 has now violently woken us up to the 21st century labor market. And it puts the challenge on all of us to address what we call systemic failures. At World Employment Confederation, we don't think we can just pick up where things were before. A road to recovery means seizing the opportunity for innovation, and importantly also in terms of labor market frameworks, social innovation. So we have the momentum and we have the expertise. That's what I take away from the session of today. It's the moment for social innovation, and we have a vast set of public and private expertise to bank on. It's about complementing the baseline, and we heard, and so much more. We've just heard and seen the vast array of solutions to onboard in the journey to innovate social protection schemes. All speakers showcase the extensive expertise available to us, notably with regards to how the scheme should be built and financed. As we together set out on this journey, we need to be impact-oriented. We need to build systems that allow protection for all, independently of the form of work they have chosen. And for us, this summarizes in the fact that the goal is to support people and not jobs. For those who now are lucky to be in the formal economy, we need to help to safely transition from job to job and from sector to sector, while retaining meaningful access to income support, training opportunities, and career guidance. And while we do that, we need to break down and reform those systems that keep people in unsustainable occupations. One outcome of the crisis must be that diverse forms of work become a reality of every country. We've been talking about it at the ILO, the G20, the OECD, the EU Commission level, even certain countries. It is the mix that sustains all employment, growth, and the recovery for the COVID-19 crisis. In this spirit, costs, benefits, and risks of social protection systems need to be shared proportionally. Indeed, we must not penalize people on how they work or top-down decide that only one preferred way of working exists for all. We need to protect people, not jobs. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, together, we can and we will build safety nets that empower people to take the next step on the labor market. Together, we can turn the safety net into a trampoline. That is how we think the human-centered approach can be leveraged to build back better. Thank you, Tom.
Great, fantastic, Bettina. That's a great and uplifting message to finish on. In the spirit of employee well-being, we're a bit worried about your. Is it a bit cold there, Bettina? Can we help you with some heating, maybe? So just a bit concerned. So Sanjon, you mentioned public-private sector cooperation being a big theme. So I think it's very apt that to close today's session, we're joined by Ji-Hung Yoon, who is the Director of International Cooperation at the Korean Employment Information Services, but also is working with WAPES, which is the representative body for the Public Employment Services. So over to you to finish with the last speech.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Ji-Hung Yoon, who is the representative of WAPES, and I'm joining today the webinars. And I really appreciate to all of the speakers and the participants who attended this webinar. And I also want to deliver my thanks to all the WEC and ILO officials for suggesting today's previous opportunity. We remember the last two webinars that we have shared the impact of the global pandemic of COVID-19 on employment services and how countries and organizations react to current crisis in the labor market. And today's third webinar has reached out the fruitful discussion on the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on the social protection system and its beneficiaries, as well as various countermeasures to normalize the labor market. Also, these discussions and lessons cannot be applied to all countries in common and should be developed by considering each country's environment. But I'm sure this will help many countries to overcome the COVID-19. So in Korean case, Korea is coping with the crisis based on the COVID-19 emergency relief grant and the subsidies for the maintaining employment as a social protection system related to COVID-19. The first, the COVID-19 emergency relief grant was implemented twice in a total as a government initiated cash support measure to support the people who suffered economic damage due to COVID-19. And based on the income in the May, the first, and it provided $200 per person to the bottom, the 70% centered on employees learning and small business owner and job and suffered severe damage with COVID-19 in September. And second, there is the subsidies for the maintaining employment status. For example, if a company maintains its employment of unpaid leaves, the government will support 50% of the average wage, temporarily support $1,200 for the freelancer and support employers who maintain employment through the tax benefit. However, since we do not know how long this COVID-19 incident will last, we need to consider the possible coverage range to support the people who need the social help. Since there's the limitation to support people by cash, so the Korean government is also considering other various financial and economic countermeasures. So in addition, we actively implement social distance policies such as expanding telecommuting and work from home and checking body temperature in order to protect the safety on our workplace from COVID-19. So now there's many companies and organizations that we are protecting from the COVID-19 everywhere in Korea. So, and over the 100 years, following the, you remember the Black Fog in the 14th century and the Spanish flu in the early 20th centuries, we are facing a new global pandemic now. Global cooperation is very important to overcome the crisis. And in particular, the employment and labor sector are the hardest hit in this crisis. So we need to overcome the crisis together and through the close cooperation and information sharing. So once again, I would like to deliver my appreciation to all the people who involved and hope to meet again different topic in their futures. And I wish you all good health, and so please take care. And thank you again, everyone. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much for that, and a great note to close on. Sanjon, you mentioned at the start, this is the end of the series. It is. Hopefully there'll perhaps be other installments, maybe be a whole box set of ILO WEC events coming. So hopefully there will be further opportunities for that collaboration. So thank you everybody for taking part. Thank you to all the speakers. There's a huge amount of content there. Lots of links on the chat box as well for you to have a look at. When we close the webinar, there will be a form for you to give us the feedback, which we always seek. There'll also be an email where you can give us feedback if you don't have time to do it now. So do give us your views and feedback. Again, thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to everybody who organized these webinars. It does take quite a lot of effort to pull these events together. So fantastic work by the team behind the scenes. And thank you to everybody for your questions, your feedback going forward. Bettina, do you want to say anything? No, you're just waving at me. That's fine. Guys, thanks a lot. Have a good rest of the week, and we'll see you the next time. Okay, bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Be safe.